To understand digital evidence, it will help to have an understanding of how computers work. This is a basic introduction to the process, but it does provide a clear picture of how data is created and stored on computers. Let's start from when you switch on the computer. This in technical speak is called the boot process. Now, step 1. The computer is switched on. Now, when that takes place, the next thing that follows is some automated computer activities. Now, this covers what precisely the computer is doing internally to get itself ready for proper use. So at that point, you will find very likely a black screen and text running through the screen. There is not much you can do at this time. What the computer is doing presently at this second stage, that I have labeled the automated process, is checking that everything is okay. The keyboard is properly attached, the mouse is attached, memory is in place, the processor is ready to work, and of course, when all that passes the test, then of course it proceeds to the third stage, where if the computer is password protected, the user logon screen would emerge. Now, this stage of it is important, as we will discover much later, because don't forget that the entire idea about computer evidence is based on this concept of attribution. If it is alleged, for example, in a criminal matter, that an individual has perpetrated some criminal activities via the use of a computer or on the computer, there is the issue of attributing that particular prohibited act to that individual. So it is important to take note of this stage 3, because if the computer itself, which is the subject matter of the alleged crime, is not password protected, then of course it means there is opportunity for some other individuals to have had access to that computer. However, if the computer is password protected, then your arguments and strategy would have to be sought elsewhere. So that's a very important stage, stage 3, whether or not there is a user logon on the subject computer or not. Then of course at stage 4, when there is a successful logon, the user activity on the computer now begins. The activity could be surfing the internet, sending or receiving emails, preparing a Word document, preparing a PowerPoint presentation, or just listening to video or watching a multimedia file like a film. All of these activities are possible on a computer. So these will be classed under user activity. Now, the other important point in all of these is at stage 5, what we need to realize is when all of this happens between stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, what the user is actually doing is creating what we refer to as a digital DNA. There is the fundamental principle here that once any activity, user activity particularly, occurs on a computer, there is a trace of that activity left somewhere on that computer. So in terms of investigating computer evidence, this is precisely what the investigator is looking for. The investigator is looking for digital DNA that was created by the user during the use of the computer, or digital DNA that was automatically created by the computer. Don't forget, all of that will happen at this stage during the use of the computer. So in total, it is important that we take advantage of knowing what the sequence is and what the port of call is, what we should be looking at in terms of the evidence. So in terms of attribution, we will be concerned with whether or not there was a user logon on that particular subject computer. And in terms of assessing or challenging the report from the adversary, we would be looking at the quality, probative quality of the digital DNA that was created during the use of the computer. Now, assuming the computer has logged, the boot process has gone on smoothly and the user has logged on successfully and the user has commenced using the computer. The one other important subject I need to discuss is what is referred to as the user profile. But before then, let's quickly just see what is possible. When the user logs on, the user is either logging on to a standalone computer, or the user is logging on to a network environment, or the user is actually logging on to a network from within any of these environments, either from a standalone computer or a network computer. Some of the activities the user will be performing is creating documents, Word documents, PowerPoint documents, and conducting printing and possible faxing, and in today's technological world, also the possibility of making telephone calls via their computers. Each of these activities from point 3 to point 6 all would leave digital evidence. At this point, we are concerned with the logon credentials of the user to identify who actually logged on to perform all of these activities. That's why it's important for us to look at the topic or user profile. A user profile simply refers to the sum of the environment and workspace identity of a user when the user is logged on either to a standalone computer or a network server. So the workspace would be, what's the wallpaper, do you have your card or the picture of your car on the front of the computer, the screensaver, where do you save your documents within the computer, and what kind of color have you given the window screen. So this is your environment, as it were, when the user logs on. So different users can create separate environments when they log on to the computer. All of these in total would create the specific identity for a given user. So that would, in sum, refer to the user's profile on that particular computer. So the user profile helps to identify who was using the computer when the particular activity being investigated took place. Find the user and you will find who did it, right? With computers, it is not that simple. Very often, a combination of evidence is required to confirm the true identity of the computer user, especially where a user profile does not exist or was falsified. The use of a computer falls generally into two major blocks. 1. The computer user is either connected to a standalone computer or the computer user is connected to a networked computer. A standalone computer is a computer that is not connected to any other network or any other computer, properly speaking. A networked computer is a computer that is connected to one or more computers. Note that a computer connected to the internet is a networked computer. Why is it crucial to determine whether a computer is standalone or networked? It is crucial because it presents the possible points of existence of digital evidence, especially where the evidence is disputed. On a standalone computer, all of the digital evidence required is located on one computer. However, if a computer is connected or was in the past connected to a network, the evidence sought can be found on the suspect computer or on network servers. For example, when a user connects to the internet from the privacy of their home, they are actually connected to a computer network. The internet is the largest network of computers known to man. The internet is essentially a connection of globally dispersed computers with the ability to communicate and transfer data to and fro. However, when a user visits a website on the internet, sends emails or downloads files and folders, all of these so-called internet activities is conducted via the computers of the user's internet service provider. For the defense lawyer, it will be important to confirm the status of a user's profile on a subject computer, particularly where that user denies any knowledge of the activity in question that was perpetrated on the internet. Therefore, to attribute a particular set of digital evidence to the activities of an individual, it is important to avert your mind to 4 preliminary factors. 1. Was there an identifiable user profile on the computer? Was the computer in question connected to the internet? Was the computer in question a standalone computer? Was the computer password protected? Don't forget, the bottom line in all of this is simply that the prosecution, for example, is interested in attributing relevant facts that will ground a conviction to the activities allegedly carried out by your client on a computer or on a network. Now, as a defense lawyer, it is your responsibility to analyze that piece of evidence, and your starting point would be to ask these 4 questions that I have identified. 1. Was there an identifiable user profile on the computer? 2. Was the computer in question a standalone computer? 3. Was the computer in question connected to the internet? And 4. Was the computer password protected? It is important to conduct an analysis of all of this to arrive at a conclusion as to whether the adverse report from the prosecution is acceptable or should be challenged on the facts. Now, let us look at the important subject of how computers store data. It is important to remind you that this introductory course is not meant to be too technical. I won't dwell too much on the science. The intention here is to draw your attention to important areas you need to focus on when dealing with computer evidence. There is a lot of technical jargon associated with computer storage technology, but I would suggest you remember just 3 of these techno-speak: sectors, clusters, and unallocated clusters. The computer hard disk is like a big empty warehouse meant for storage. In order to effectively retrieve items from the storage, let's imagine you segment the storage into different compartments. One to store your old logbooks, another to store your closed files. Maybe another segment to store your old clothes or shoes. You get the drift. All of the small compartments you have created in your warehouse is equal to sectors on the hard disk and serves the same purpose. The only difference is that you can only store digital information on the computer sectors, not, of course, your household items. Taking this analogy further, if you find the law book compartments in your warehouse is no longer sufficient to hold your old law books, you will add another segment from the warehouse. Your old law books now occupy 2 sectors in the warehouse. In techno speak, we will say your old law books is occupying a cluster, that is, 2 or more sectors. All other sectors that are not occupied are known as unallocated clusters, because although they are segmented, they don't contain any item at all. However, The difference between the warehouse analogy and computers is if you remove all of your logbooks from the warehouse, the portion of the warehouse they previously occupied will become empty. With computers, however, if you delete a file from a cluster, it does not mean the cluster is empty. The deleted files will remain there until overwritten by another data. That is why we say delete does not mean deleted. This digital phenomenon is the greatest asset of the digital investigator because computer users generally believe that once they hit the delete key on the computer or empty the recycle bin, the deleted document is gone forever. Now you know this is not a correct assumption. Deleted data can be recovered subject to whether or not the initial data has been overwritten. How does this science of data deletion help the defense attorney? For one thing, your client cannot hold back information on deleted data. You must seek information regarding the history of deleted documents on your client's computer because if you do not, the other side may find it and leave you to deal with the consequences. On the other side of the coin, however, if the incriminating information is found in the unallocated, unallocated sectors of the hard drive, it could be argued that your client had no knowledge of its existence. Because most computer crimes are not strict liability crimes, proof of knowledge is often required to ground conviction. Consequently, the defense lawyer will do well to confirm the location of any prohibitive evidence that the prosecution is relying on to ground a conviction. Now, let's take a quick look at the graphics to drive home the point we were talking about with respect to hard disk storage. Again, like I said, I'd actually like you to concentrate on sectors and clusters. But just going on here, you would find, let's say for example, this bit of it here, we'll call it track. That's how computers actually write data into the hard disk. But like I said, we are not going to any of that science at all. I'm just concerned with where the evidence is and how you can contest the location of the evidence. So this little bit of it, each of this little bit here, C is a sector. So a combination of that sector would form a cluster. So this green segment here will be a cluster. And generally you will find that depending on the size of the document that is saved, that will depend on how much cluster it will occupy. So a small Word document, for example, may take just 2 clusters there, but a textbook may occupy a couple of clusters. So in terms of the unallocated segments, what is being emphasized here is that if a document resides in this green segment of the graphics we have here, which represents the internal structure of the hard disk. Now, if the user deletes that information, what is being emphasized is that this information will remain here until the computer saves newer information over it. But the interesting thing about this is this. The original information contained the entire green segment. However, the newer information that was saved in that sector may cover just these segments. Invariably, it means this part of the old file is available for discovery. So, in terms of evidence discovery, when we say delete does not mean delete, we are essentially referring to the process of the fact that the original data, until it is overwritten, remains in the hard disk. Now, let's look at the subject of the creation of digital DNA. Digital DNA is like creating a fingerprint. This would occur when a user successfully logs onto a computer and deploys an application. For example, let's say this is the desktop of a user who was successfully logged on. And all of that you find these are icons, which essentially are shortcuts to these applications. So if I click on that, that will open Word. If I click on that, that will open Access. That will open PowerPoint. And a yellow icon. These yellow icons represent folders. Folders are containers that hold other documents. That's essentially what they do. They just hold other documents. But these icons here, they are shortcuts to the programs that you find the title under. That's for Internet Explorer. So these are all shortcuts, because they make it easy for you to open the application. The green background is referred to as your desktop. Of course, that can also be changed to reflect an image of your choice, your beautiful car, or the cat in the house, or your dog, an image of your dog. So that will be your desktop. Again, just to revisit the issue of user profile. So this particular color on the background and the way the icons are arranged, all of these will be part and parcel of the user profile of the person who was logged on to the computer. Now, the point here is, in terms of creating digital DNA, the subject we are on now, anytime the user clicks on any of these icons, either to start writing a Word document, to start preparing a Word document, or proceed to the internet to particular websites, for example, all of these activities will create digital DNA. Or the user deletes a file, which comes into the recycle bin, for example. The creation of digital DNA will occur from the moment the computer user successfully logs onto a computer. The user unknowingly starts creating a digital footprint or DNA that can be traced. The computer keeps logs of practically every activity that goes on within it. Typically, a computer user will log on to a computer to do any of the following. After a successful logon, the computer user may wish to deploy an application, like we said there. If you double click on that, you're actually deploying an application. The computer will record that activity. The computer user will create a file. You write a Word document, or rather, you prepare a Word document. You save the Word document, or you delete a Word document. All of these activities will be recorded somewhere in the computer in separate logs. Sometimes we have logs automatically created by the computer to reflect what is going on internally, which will have nothing, as it were, to do with the user. You will have application logs, like opening a Word document. All of these logs would reflect what is going on at any given point in time. However, although most of the activities identified above will create their own evidence logs, there is a bigger repository of these evidence on the computer. It is called the registry. The computer registry is usually hidden from the computer user, but can easily be accessed by the initiated. Consequently, in terms of determining who did what, when, where, and how, the concept of attribution, the computer expert will examine all of the logs generated by the user activities identified from point 1 to point 5 and tie them to a user profile on the computer in order to determine whose digital DNA he is examining. The takeaway here is that if the prosecution cannot prove the existence of a user profile that can be tied to your client, they have a major problem. The recourse here from the prosecution's end would be to rely on circumstantial evidence. For example, Was the subject computer found in your client's bedroom? Who owns the subject computer? Did anyone else have access to it? Does the computer contain files belonging to your client? Does the usage pattern fit? A combination of all of these circumstantial evidence, if it points to one irresistible conclusion that your client owns the computer, then of course the very fundamental requirement of establishing a user profile may not be so crucial after all. But the circumstantial evidence must be compelling in order to obviate the need for establishing the precise user profile, being that of your client. In summary, always seek to tie the digital DNA to a user profile. Now,